In 2025, I read exactly 100 books, and I cannot tell you how satisfying that feels when I'm now sitting down to talk to you about my 2025 reading stats. I am going to be taking you through my reading spreadsheet. I'm going to be talking about my Goodreads year in review, all that good stuff. So if you are a bit of a stats nerd like me, then hopefully you will find this video somewhat interesting. The spreadsheet that I use, for anyone who's curious, is called Corpile. It was created by Book Roast, and I've been using it for a few years now. Sorry, I've got my laptop right next to me and it just went off and it really like woo. But as I was saying, the spreadsheet that I use was created by Book Roast, and I have adapted it and tweaked it over the years just so that it reflects what I personally enjoy tracking, but I will have it linked in the description just in case that you would like to check it out. I think we are going to start with my Goodreads year in review though, and this is where sometimes I notice there's a little bit of a discrepancy between my spreadsheet and Goodreads, because according to Goodreads, I read 43,095 pages last year, whereas according to my spreadsheet, I read 43,590. So it's not too big of a difference. Sometimes I do think that Goodreads isn't 100% accurate. However, Goodreads is where I realised that I'd read 100 books last year. Obviously, I knew that it was coming. Basically, let me start again. So when I filmed my 2026 goals video, I talked about how I didn't think that I was going to read 100 books that year, and it was going to be the first time in 5 years where I wasn't going to reach that goal, and I was fine about it. I think where the confusion came from is in my reading tracker spreadsheet. I was including DNFs. I've removed them for the purpose of this video, but I did have all of my DNFs in there because when I start a new book, I add it to my spreadsheet, and then if I don't finish it, I just mark it as a DNF. Whereas on Goodreads, if I don't finish a book, I move it to a different shelf so it doesn't get included within the numbers. I hope all of that made sense. I feel like that was a very long-winded explanation, but basically my spreadsheet was telling me that I'd already read 100 books, and I knew that was a lie because it was including DNFs, whereas I went onto Goodreads, realised that I only needed to read 2 more books in order to reach 100, and I did that over the Christmas holidays. So yeah, feels so satisfying, like I've already said. With some of these charts, they are obviously based on percentages, and so it's just, it's going to be good. Moving swiftly on, we next up have my shortest and longest book of the year. So according to Goodreads, the shortest book that I read was The Answer Is No by Frederick Backman at only 68 pages. The longest book I read was Toll the Hounds by Stephen Erickson, the 8th book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. That was nearly 1,300 pages. My average book length in 2025 was 430 pages, and I do feel like that's higher than it's been in previous years. I do track the length of the books that I'm reading in my spreadsheet, and so many of the books that I read were over 500-600 pages. There were 5 books I read that were over 1,000 pages, and to be fair, I think they were all Malazan books. But the point is that reading the Malazan Book of the Fallen series made me appreciate slowing down my reading and dedicating that time to reading longer books. I don't want to repeat stuff that I've already talked about in my goals video, but in that video I talked about how I used to feel a bit, I don't know, if I was reading a book for longer than about 4 or 5 days, I would start to feel a bit stressed about it, and I would start to get bored of that book. I would start to think, okay, I need to speed things up so I can move on to the next thing. Yes, I do still love it when a book captures me so much that I want to just binge read it. I still love that feeling, but there are certain fantasy books that I love that are meant to be read slower, and there's something about sinking into a world and being part of that world for weeks at a time that just also feels very cathartic. So I'm no longer scared of reading long books. To be honest, after reading the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, I think I'm going to feel like I can do anything. I'm actually currently reading book 9 at the time of filming this, and then I only have book 10 left to go, and I will have read this humongous series, and I'm very proud of myself. Considering I was debating whether to continue after book 1, I'm very proud of myself for reading this series, because I used to be terrified of reading anything that was over about 600 pages. If we're talking about my best month of the year in terms of volume, I apparently read 13 books in September. I don't know how that happened. That was also the only month where I read over 5,000 pages. I don't know whether I was listening to a lot of audiobooks that month or whether it was because I had a lower reading month in August. Maybe I started a Malazan book in August and I finished it in September, so those pages counted towards September. I do feel like reading the Malazan series has kind of skewed my stats for the year. Let's say that September was my best reading month. September, October were both pretty good reading months. Something else that I've started tracking over the last few years is how many books I'm reading from my own TBR versus how many books I'm adding to my TBR. And last year, shall we do a drum roll? Last year, I reduced my TBR by 28 books. I read 60 books from my own TBR and I added 32 books to my TBR. I think that's also included when I bought the Kindle version of books that I own physically. Did I include those? I think sometimes I did and sometimes I didn't, but yeah, let's just say that roughly I reduced my TBR by 28 books. And I feel like that's a good number, but it could be better. I did do a series towards the end of the year where I was specifically reading books from my Kindle, and I think that really helped. Weirdly, in 2024, I also reduced my TBR by 28 books. So I feel like a goal for this year, 2026, should be to get past 30. Let's see if I can reduce my TBR by more than 30 books. That would feel really good. In terms of the format of the books that I read, 34 were audiobooks, 55 were ebooks, and 10 were physical books. And then there was one that I think I read a combination of either physical and audiobook. 26 of the books that I read were from BookBeat, which is really good to see because BookBeat is an audiobook platform that I pay for. I switched a few years ago. I was previously using Everend, but I was getting really frustrated with their catalogue and how they kept making books unavailable, and I couldn't work out why it was happening. I know it's part of their, or at least this is how it used to be, it was part of their whole terms of service, but it was really winding me up. So I switched to BookBeat, and what I like about them is that you pay for a set number of hours, and if you decide to DNF a book or just, you just want to try a book out to see if you like the narration style, then you can do that and it doesn't penalise you, it just comes off your hours. I have recently switched from their middle tier to their lower tier because there were some months where I was not reaching, I think I was paying for 40 hours and I've switched to 20 hours. Basically, I have quite a few books that I want to listen to through my library or through, I've got a few on Audible that I bought ages ago and I want to be able to get through those as well, and I didn't feel like I could do that if I also was paying for like 40 hours on BookBeat. I think I have a referral code for BookBeat which I'll leave in the description just in case you want to try it out, but I really like their catalogue, and I find that if you're based in the UK, because I don't think they're available in the US, but if you are in the UK, then I find they have one of the best catalogues. It's much better than my library. Roughly half of the books that I read last year were standalones, and then a quarter were series, another quarter were companion novels. Most of the books that I read last year were 4 stars, which is obviously fantastic. I did have 8 2-star reads, and then about a quarter of the books that I read were 5 stars and a quarter were 3 stars. So I feel like this is a very nice spread. Obviously, I want most of the books that I'm reading to be 3 stars or above, so it's really good to know that I am choosing correctly. I can never work out whether I'm a harsh reviewer or whether I'm more generous. I think I am quite good at knowing my reading taste and only picking up books that I think there's a really good chance I'm going to like, and I think that's why it's even more disappointing when I don't like a book, because I don't pick up books unless I'm expecting to give them at least 4 stars. Genre-wise, most of the books that I read last year were mystery or thrillers, and I think this is the first year in a good few years where fantasy hasn't been my most read genre. I think that is, again, because I was reading the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, so page count wise I probably spent more time reading fantasy, but like numbers wise I read more mystery and thrillers. I also read a significant amount of literary fiction and 10 sci-fi books, and then the rest were a mixture of romance, contemporary, horror. If we compare this graph to, let's go back a few years to 2022, the amount of romance that I've read has significantly dropped, and again I talked about this in my 2026 goal goals video, so I don't want to repeat myself, but I have really fallen out of romance in the last few years and I'm really upset. So if you do have any romance recommendations for specifically books that don't feel overly tropey, please let me know in the description, because I really want to fall back in love with romance at some point, hopefully in the next year. But you know, I don't want to give up on romance. I think I need to focus on authors that I know and trust, as well as backlist books. I think it's a lot of the new releases that I'm not really vibing with, and that's why I'm not reading as much as I used to. For this final section, we're going to run through some author stats. So last year, 27% of the books that I read were written by authors of colour, 69% were written by women, and 3% were written by non-binary authors. Most of the books I read were written by authors who I've read from before. I didn't read many debuts last year, and I also didn't read that many books by authors that were new to me, but I did find some authors last year that have the potential to be new favourite authors, so I really need to work on that. I feel like I say this every year. I do tend to focus a lot of my time on reading books by authors that I've read from in the past. And then finally, I read 17 books by British authors, 42 books by American authors, 12 books by Canadian authors, and I think 8 of those will be Stephen Erickson. Then the rest are a bit of a mix. So we have 7 books by Irish authors, 6 books by Japanese authors, and then, yeah, the rest I've only read about 2 or 3 books, or maybe even 1 book by various nationalities. But that wraps up my 2025, nearly said 2026 there. That wraps up my 2025 reading. So thank you for watching. If you made it this far, let me know in the comments how your reading stats compare to mine. And let's think of a good question to ask, actually. What was your most read genre in 2025? Or if you read a mix of different genres, what were your top 3 genres for 2025? Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Click subscribe if you would like to see more videos from me. But otherwise, I will see you next time. Bye.